Welcome, everyone, to the Fantasy and Betting Podcast presented by the 33rd Team. I am your host, as always, Josh Larky. Today, we are going to be going over how to beat Yahoo and ESPN because a lot of us play on those platforms and the ADPs are pretty different platform to platform. You want to win your league. We want to win our leagues. We want to help you win your leagues. Everyone is happy. And co-host Ryan Reynolds, as many of you know, is a very big, not just fantasy and betting guy, but NFL fan in general. He watches every snap of every game. He has power ranked all 32 teams. And we are going to discuss some of the more controversial power rankings. That way, all of us out there, fan Twitter, everybody can take a deep breath and understand that there's a method to the madness. Ryan doesn't actually hate your favorite team for the sake of hating them. Ryan, I'm going to pass it off to you now. So for everyone out there, Ryan Reynolds NFL on Twitter, keep telling him that you like him in Deadpool. I think that's hilarious.
Oh, Josh, I may hate some of their favorite teams, so just to put that out there. Anyway, let's dive right into things on Yahoo. Josh, we both have Jamar Chase as our top-rated player. He goes within the first 3 picks on Yahoo. A lot of drafters prefer Justin Jefferson. I'm fine with that. I don't have any problem with that at all. Some will take Christian McCaffrey over Chase. Some will even take Austin Eckler ahead of him. What would you say to the drafters that don't have a top 3 pick, or those that don't want to draft Jamar Chase at all?
One thing that we noticed is when the two of us, we hopped on a Zoom call, we were going through Yahoo, and we kind of noticed that most rounds we preferred wide receiver. And round 1 was actually one of the rounds where we went, you know what? We might lean wide receiver, but it's close. And I think round 1 of these Yahoo drafts, that's a great time to, if you want Christian McCaffrey, grab Christian McCaffrey. If you want Bijan Robinson, a Saquon Barkley, and Austin Eckler, these are the players that I think you can draft in round 1. And you might go, oh my God, I took a running back round 1. You guys keep talking about receivers. And then all of a sudden you just realize next round after that. And that there's so many great receiver values that I actually think you are legally allowed to start with a running back and you can still have a very good looking team. We'll actually talk about one of those real teams later on.
Speaking of wide receivers, Josh, what's the plan for round 2 on Yahoo?
We'll keep this quick. I mean, when you have Amon-Ra St. Brown with ADP 18, Garrett Wilson going at pick 19, Jalen Waddle going at pick 21, if you're giving me 2 third-year and 1 second-year receivers, all of them with massive upside, I mean, I'm going to rotate through those 3 pretty much. And I don't think you need to overthink that. Those are the 3 players that should be on your draft board. We think of them as all fringe round 1 picks. Amon-Ra actually we think should be a first round pick. So yeah, just take your pick out of those 3. Whichever one you want to root for, great. Take him.
If I can get Amon-Ra in all of my home leagues over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be absolutely ecstatic. Now, this article that we have on Yahoo includes 11 of our fades at cost on the Yahoo platform as well. It's not just all positive things. We want to steer you away from some options too. Now, Josh, round 3 is a great case study in balancing value drafting with your own player stances. With that in mind, who are you targeting in round 3?
So neither of us are super high on Mark Andrews in general. I do love that he's the number 1 target in the Ravens offense. He had the massive 2021 season. We think the Ravens will pass more. The issue really comes down to we're now injecting round 1 rookie wide receiver Zay Flowers, Odell Beckham Jr., who was great with the Rams prior to his injury. He's really been nothing but a high target earner. And then Rashad Bateman, who was one of the NFL's most efficient receivers before getting hurt last year. He has round 1 draft capital. He was a great prospect. I think Mark Andrews might be in line for a 20 to 22% target share. I'm worried about taking him in round 2. He goes at pick 36 on Yahoo. And I think this is the perfect chance to say, you know what? Maybe not a player I've gotten a ton of on other platforms, but I will definitely be overweight the field on Mark Andrews at pick 36 on Yahoo.
Yeah, same. I mean, I'm not like overly bullish or bearish on him at current costs in general in big tournaments or best ball, but I'm with you here in round 3, especially at the end of round 3. I'm interested. Now, Josh, when we went through this yesterday, when we went through how Yahoo is their players ranked, there was one guy I feel above all that felt like an auto draft, and he's in round 5. Are we on the same page in this situation here?
I mean, everyone knows I'm a Chargers fan, not just because I like the Chargers, but I like them for fantasy. Probably
Yeah.
going to lead the NFL in pass attempts. And if you can get the clear number one receiver, Keenan Allen, in the 5th round, when I think he should be going in the mid to late 20s, that's just that value is value. We'll talk about a team I drafted earlier today later on, but guess what? Keenan Allen, round 5, is on that roster.
Yeah, as he should be. And just so that people know, I'm not a Chargers fan. I'm a Giants fan, and I feel the same way. Speaking of, there's two major values in round 7 here, Josh. One in particular that I'm going to try to get on every single one of my Yahoo teams. Let's dive into your beloved Chargers once more.
Yeah, if the people were sick of hearing about the Chargers, well, buckle up, everyone, because in round 7 you can get Mike Williams at pick 74 and Justin Herbert at pick 75. I don't really know why you would be taking one of these big 3 quarterbacks in the 2nd round when you can get Justin Herbert, who probably scores within 1 to 2 fantasy points of them 5 rounds later. And if for some reason you already took a quarterback or you're like, I'm fading quarterback, I love Geno Smith or Tua Tagovailoa late, great. You can take Mike Williams, get Big Mike in round 7. He goes on most other platforms in round 4 or round 5. So for some reason, Yahoo drafters have decided they hate the Chargers. Maybe they're having flashbacks to last year when Justin Herbert had the rib cartilage injury, when Keenan Allen missed time, when Mike Williams missed time, when star left tackle Rashawn Slater goes down in week 3 and misses the rest of the season with the biceps tear. I don't know what's going on. It's a new season. They're all healthy. This team was 2nd in the NFL in pass attempts last year, behind only Tom Brady's Buccaneers. Tom Brady no longer plays in the NFL. The Chargers should comfortably lead the NFL in pass attempts this year. And then one more thing I want to mention. You might be like, all right, you seem to really like these guys. I'm actually not playing on Yahoo, but I want to listen to your stuff. I might play on Yahoo. If you just want the generic in quotes rankings, my fantasy football cheat sheet is on the 33rdteam.com. It's got my top 160 rankings. It's got my top 12 kickers. It's got Ryan's top 12 fantasy defenses. The top 160 rankings with full write-ups for every player is also on the site. If you want to search a player's name and say, like, I would like to read 2 paragraphs about this player, we've got you. My fantasy football game plan is my quick hitting 7-8 minute read. If you want full strategy on how to execute different really high level roster construction moves that will set you up for success as the season goes on, that is all completely free on the 33rdteam.com.
You can find Josh on Twitter at JLarkyTweets. You know, Justin Herbert's the guy that I want to build around in Yahoo. And on the Mike Williams front, Yahoo feels about Mike Williams just like you and Dave Kluge do about Alexander Madison. You guys hate Alexander Madison. Now, scoring on Yahoo is half PPR, Josh. How do you treat this flex spot in that kind of format?
Yeah, I know a lot of the boomers out there, they say you have to have a running back in the flex. And they also like to start with their 3 running backs, sometimes 4 running backs. I actually don't hate flexing a running back in this format. I generally try to set myself up to have receivers that can go into the flex. I like to build my depth through the receiver position, but we'll talk about a team I did shortly. And I actually might be flexing some running backs at times throughout the season. And I think that's one of the big differences when you go from standard to half PPR is that standard, you just have to flex a running back. Half PPR, I'm like, yeah, you know what? You could go either way. It just depends on your roster. Whereas like PPR, then we start to shift more towards running backs. But I actually think it's totally fine to go either way. So I wouldn't pigeonhole yourself as to if you're a standard guy, like I wouldn't say, oh, I have to flex a running back. And if you're a PPR person, I wouldn't treat it as we need to flex a receiver. So I actually love the half PPR Yahoo setting because it allows for more flexibility and you can really have your player takes and have a more flexible build in those early rounds.
Some people will roll their eyes at your round 9 target here, Josh. He's only played 10 NFL games in the last 3 seasons. Talk to good people into Michael Thomas in round 9.
Well, last year in 3 games, Michael Thomas averaged 14.5 half PPR fantasy points a game, 14.5. That is borderline a wide receiver 1 type numbers. That's pretty good. If we look at that, we expand that 3-game sample to the past 3 years with the 10 games. He's been pacing on a 17-game pace for 130 targets, just over 1,000 yards. Michael Thomas has been in and out of the lineup with injuries, but the one consistent thing is when he's played, he's actually been quite good. And I know one thing that we've talked about is that sometimes, like, once you get past round 7, round 8, you're just looking for guys where you're like, you know what, 1 or 2 things break right, I might start them in my team. Or like, oh, this is maybe someone I start for week 1 and then we'll wait and see. Michael Thomas is the perfect start him week 1, and then you see what happens and maybe you start him again. Because week 1, there's no Alvin Kamara due to the 3-game suspension, and they get the Tennessee Titans, who allowed the most passing yards in the NFL last year to opposing offenses. Their secondary is probably a touch better than last year, but I think it's probably still a bottom 5 at worst for your fantasy offense. They're a bottom 10 pass defense. Michael Thomas is going to be a plug-and-play wide receiver 2 for that first matchup, and getting a bona fide starter like that for the early season in round 9 is a very nice proposition.
Follow Josh at Larky Tweets on Twitter. Now, we talk about player stances a lot, and I think that's very important. I think it's also easier to convey those type of concepts where roster construction and strategy are a little bit more difficult. On that front, what players should drafters focus on in the later rounds?
So when I say this, some of you out there might be like, yeah, we know. But a lot of people that preach these policies actually do not draft the way I see it. I see a lot of industry people, a lot of people in high stakes drafts still making pretty critical errors in the late rounds. What you really want to do towards the end of your draft is there's pretty much 2 archetypes that you want to look for. Rookie wide receivers with good draft capital. So any of the big 4, Jackson Smith and Jigba of the Seahawks, Quentin Johnston of the Chargers, Jordan Addison of the Vikings, Zay Flowers of the Ravens. These are all great bets. If we think about last year, who do we have? Chris Olave on the Saints. We just had Garrett Wilson on the Jets with terrible quarterback play, still give you over 1,100 receiving yards. Drake London broke out at the end of the season. Year after year, we get this. I mean, 2 years ago, we had Jamar Chase. 3 years ago, we had Justin Jefferson. Like every single year, there's multiple guys. Even like, what was it? 2 years ago, we had Amon-Ra, the 33rd team's own Amon-Ra St. Brown, who does a show for us. He broke out where he was like an auto, like what, 10, 12 targets a game, week after week. That is the receiver that you should have on your bench. You should not have the Juju Smith-Schuster, these veterans where you know the ceiling's not very high anymore. Why are you just hoping, crossing your fingers that we might be able to flex Juju one of these weeks as a bye week fill-in? That is not how you win your league. If you're starting Juju consistently as your wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, good luck. You're not going to get first place. And then the other end of it is running backs. We want running backs where we are pretty confident they're 1 injury away from forcing themselves into our starting lineup. So I know it's painful to think about, but whoever your favorite running back is, imagine them pulling a hamstring. They're out 4 weeks. Who is immediately scoring 15 fantasy points a game? Like Travis Etienne goes down. I love Travis Etienne. He could get hurt. He missed all of his rookie year. Tank Bigsby suddenly steps up and starts getting 15 touches a game. And we go, oh, that's pretty exciting. I like that. And that's really what you want to be doing. As painful as it is to imagine your favorite running back getting hurt, that is how you should operate in the late rounds. Because if you're drafting a guy and you're like, okay, if these 4 things happen, I start him, you're going to be dominated by someone who loads up the back of their roster with guys where one thing needs to go right. So running backs, 1 injury, and now they thrust themselves into your starting lineup. Rookie wide receivers, they see the field more, and now all of a sudden you go, wow, they're getting a 90% snap share, and they're getting 8-9 targets a game. I have to start them. You want to make it easy on yourself. Don't draft Juju and then go, oh, well, if he returns to the form from half a decade ago, and if Mac Jones improves upon his performance from 2 seasons ago, and the Patriots decide they're going to pass more. And you know what? Just at that point, I don't know what you're doing. Like if all those things go right in this alternate reality, congratulations. I like to live in a world where I just need one simple thing to happen. And now my bench players are forcing themselves into the starting lineup because you and I are the same way. We don't want to have the start sit anxiety each week. I loved last year when I had a Garrett Wilson or a Chris Olave on my team. It was set it and forget it. They flashed, and I said, "This is now my starter." I remember Samaje Perine last year showed himself to be the number 2 back for the Bengals. Joe Mixon misses 2 weeks. We started Samaje Perine, and we were happy about it. That is what you want for your fantasy lineup.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we want difference makers, right, Josh? That's kind of the game plan here. We don't want low floor. We don't want decent floor, high low ceiling guys. We want guys that can win your league ultimately. Now, Josh, as you know, we have a pretty big meeting on Thursday afternoon. Like the true degenerate that you are, you scheduled a $250 Yahoo draft for moments after that meeting's close. Run us through the results of that draft, man.
Yeah, we talked about how we wanted an actual draft to look at and be able to make sure that the strategy article we'd put out is effective. I'm going to run through this draft, and I will say that even though Yahoo is a 1-minute timer, the meeting I showed up a minute and a half, quote unquote, late with my 5th pick, and I got auto picked. So the first 4 people must have drafted so rapid fire that one of the few players I generally have faded early round 1, Austin Eckler, did end up on my team. But as we mentioned before, round 1 actually ends up being a good running back time. So even getting the running back I didn't love, the team still looks great. So here's how it started. Austin Eckler, round 1. Rounds 2 and 3, we pound the young receivers, Amon-Ra St. Brown, then Chris Olave. We're feeling really good. Round 4, I took Breece Hall. That felt like a nice home run swing in sort of the late part of the 4th round. And I knew that there were running back values coming up because if you read our article, you'll know who those guys are. Round 5, auto pick, Keenan Allen. We all know you can't say no to Keenan Allen in round 5. I thought about taking Herbert in round 7 to stack with Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler. I also thought about Darren Waller at tight end, and I said, you know what? I'm going to kick myself if I have Eckler and Allen on this team and I don't get Justin Herbert. So I took Herbert in round 6. Waller went ahead of me in round 7, but it's okay. We took every podcast, we talk about David Montgomery. I got David Montgomery. I know I had Breece Hall early on, so I wanted early running back production. I want a guy that's stable, and if Jahmyr Gibbs goes down, he elevates and becomes a league winner. So we took Montgomery. Then we went with Marquise Brown in round 8. That felt like a good price. Ended up with Pat Freiermuth at tight end as the consolation prize for missing on Darren Waller. And then I think this is textbook for how to close out your fantasy bench. Went Jamal Williams, a guy who's actually a starting running back the first 3 weeks. And then anything ever happens to Alvin Kamara later in the season, again, 1 injury away, he's the starter. Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnston, we talked about both, the round 1 draft capital rookie receivers. And then I ended with 3 running backs because we want the 1 injury away type guys. I don't actually know who the starter is in Miami. Ryan does not know either. I took both Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert. The way I see it is at the end of your draft, let's just try and lock up something. You're basically trying to lock up a starting roster spot at some point. And I'm pretty sure one of these guys is going to be the main ball carrier for the Dolphins. They were both RB2s last year. We'll kind of see who it is. I've got them both on my team. And then I took a 1 injury away running back in Jaylen Warren. Anything happens to Najee Harris, I believe the 3rd string running back is currently Anthony McFarland, which sounds to me like if Najee Harris goes down, Jaylen Warren gets pretty much all the touches. So that right there, I think is a pretty good way to build a roster where I've got the Chargers super stack with Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler. What if Mike Williams doesn't fire? I might even be able to start Quentin Johnston on my bench. We've got the other upside receivers. And at the end of the day, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Chris Olave and Keenan Allen do feel like every week starters at receiver. Pat Freiermuth at tight end isn't my favorite, but I think he can actually score within 2 to 3 fantasy points of the Hawkinsons, of the Waller types. And then at running back, it feels pretty good when you go, wow, week 1, I'll start Austin Eckler and David Montgomery. I could even swap out Montgomery for Jamal Williams. And then I have Breece Hall, where a couple weeks in, I begin starting him, and he looks like he's probably going to be Aaron Jones plus for Aaron Rodgers in fantasy.
Yeah, it's a good looking team. I'm curious if you're going to start throwing out some trade offers to get Eckler off your team since you faded him. But even if you keep him, I think the only reason I'd even consider trading him is that you have a lot of Chargers to begin with. But, I mean, you can't really go, it's even if you're not taking them in general, like one of the things that I like to do, and Liam does this in best ball. If I did this with Mark Andrews last year. I faded Mark Andrews for the most part, but I took Mark Andrews into significant season long league as a form of hedge. So even if the guy that I'm fading hits, I reap some benefits based on how I play.
Yeah, I would agree there. This is, I believe, my first Eckler team in a managed league. I think I have 8, 9 drafts under my belt at this point in leagues that are generally 250 or higher in price. So you know what? We got some real money now in Eckler. We've got the 250 draft in. And honestly, the Eckler fade isn't that I think he's going to do poorly at fantasy. No round 1 pick do I expect to do truly poorly in fantasy.
Right.
I just think that Eckler has averaged 19 touchdowns per season the past 2 years. He's coming off a career high 127 targets, over 100 receptions because every Chargers receiver got injured. I think Eckler is going to finish as like the RB5. It is not that I think he's going to have some catastrophic season. I just don't really see how the RB1 overall season is in his range of outcomes this year. I think he needs too many things to go right. But it's not like I hate the guy. It's just you have to sort of pick your stances. And it's easier for me to see Christian McCaffrey and Bijan Robinson finishing as RB1 overall than Austin Eckler. Now let's pivot to power rankings, everyone. We'll talk about ESPN shortly. Ryan put out his power rankings on the 33rdteam.com. They're free to view. All 32 teams are ranked. And not only do you get the rankings, but Ryan gives you context behind each of his positions. Let's dive on in. So I didn't think there were any surprises in your top 5. Someone's like, whoa, you sure? Read the article, everyone. It's free. But I think we should start at team 6. A lot of people thought it was too high to have the Cowboys at 6. Why did you put them there so aggressively?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a guy that believes in tradition. I love tradition even, but I don't really care about conventional thought processes with things. So I'm gonna put a few wrinkles in my own power rankings, and one of them, going to ground them a little bit in betting markets, how they value teams. I think that's important. I think that also keeps you grounded in your own biases on teams. And 2, the path to contention in your own conference has to be a factor to some degree, where a lot of people told me, yeah, the Ravens should be 6. Well, the Cowboys have a much clearer path to playing in the NFC Championship than the Ravens do in the AFC Championship, is how I see it. So I have them all similarly tiered, similarly clustered. I'd even say teams 6 through 13, I probably have somewhat similarly clustered. So I have Dallas on top of that group because they've been 12-5 in the last 2 years. They signed Stephon Gilmore. As our guy Andy Benoit just put out in his cornerback rankings, the Cowboys have 2 top 10 corners now. You add that to their premium defense already with Micah Parsons, who might be the best defender in the league. Dallas is looking at a top 5 defense. Brandon Cooks not only brings an upgrade at receiver this season, but he brings field stretching speed. So both units got better. Both of them have been high-performing units. Dallas is one of the 3 consistent contenders in the NFC. I think 6 is fair.
I mean, I don't have too much pushback there. I think that's well laid out. We're actually just going to drop one rung down to team 7. You have the Jaguars all the way up there. I keep hearing the Jaguars are going to Jaguar. Some people are predicting that they finish 2nd, 3rd, 4th in the division. I really don't understand it. I think they're a very strong team. You might like them more than me. Talk about them all the way up at number 7.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Like if you said, hey, Baltimore should be 7, I don't really have a ton of pushback in like a 1-versus-1 situation. I think they're very comparable. The Jaguars actually beat the Ravens last year. But the thing that the Jaguars have is actually they have 2 things. One is Trevor Lawrence is already knocking on the door of being an elite quarterback in entering his 3rd season. He probably gets there maybe even by the midway point. if things break the right way. Now, the thing here is this. The Jaguars have an advantage over all of the primary contenders in the AFC. And that said, they get to play 6 games within the AFC South. Our guy Daniel Raz was on this too. The Jaguars are a pretty interesting mid-range long shot to be the AFC's number 1 seed at the end of the season. So I have them a little bit higher in the cluster than maybe some people think I should.
All right, we've been pretty chummy to this point. I do have a gotcha moment. So Ryan, I consume all your work as everyone else should on the 33rdteam.com. It's free. I follow you on Twitter at Ryan Reynolds NFL like a good coworker should. And what I did notice though is you had division by division record predictions, win-loss on the site that came out last week. You had the Jets winning the AFC East at 12-5. And then you had the Bills and Dolphins chomping at the bit at 11-6, right behind them. So Jets were winning the AFC East. Then I open up your power rankings and I see the Buffalo Bills at number 5 and then the Jets all the way down at 10. How do you make sense of this? And do I have a legitimate gotcha moment here?
Sure, I'm not sure I'd call it a gotcha moment, but I can see why you'd be like, why is this guy doing this? So I'll explain. Like I said before, whenever you're doing any kind of rankings, you have to do your best to be as objective as possible. And since we're going to do power rankings every week, particularly, record predictions are for the whole season. Power rankings are for right now. So Buffalo's been a perennial contender for years. As Joe Banner pointed out on our first episode of the show, as long as they have Josh Allen, Buffalo's in the hunt. So I think the Jets have ridiculous upside. If Aaron Rodgers returns to MVP form, they're going to be very hard to beat given their defense and even like their talent on offense. But on the downside, the Jets are a young team. Aaron Rodgers turns 40 later this season, and they start this season with a brutal 4-game stretch with Buffalo on opening night on Monday Night Football. They play the Chiefs in week 4, and I believe it's Dallas in week 2. So I think Buffalo's more stable early in the season, where the Jets have a few let's wait and see components to their team and their potential success. So for now, I'll give Buffalo the benefit of the doubt, even though I think the Jets are going to finish better than them as long as Rodgers stays healthy.
All right, this is a gut feel prediction. What week do you see the Jets overtaking the Bills in the power rankings?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I could see the Jets beating Buffalo on opening night, but I'd say around week 8, week 9, week 10 is where I could see there being some separation there.
Let's turn to the NFC. The Detroit Lions are favorites to win the NFC North in the betting markets. The Detroit Lions. It's not a hot take that you have them at number 11, the highest in that division. Betting markets agree. The money agrees. Then we hit the Vikings at 15. Why do you have the Minnesota Vikings so much further ahead of the Packers and Bears?
I mean, it's a similar concept to Buffalo in a lot of ways, and I'll say this. Minnesota's been one of the tougher teams for me to solve this year because from a pure talent perspective, the offense looks like it's a high-end unit. They look like that's going to be a consistent thing, and their defense was atrocious last year. We've talked about this a number of times. Daniel Jones lit them up for 300 yards twice last year. Mac Jones for 382 yards on Thanksgiving night. In particular, the playoff game against the Giants, I'm not sure I've ever seen an NFL team run a ton of crossers and drags that were just basically uncovered. So Brian Flores could transform that defense is a big ask because they're light on talent, but he can make them more competitive. So from a pure talent perspective, you can argue that they're going to be better. On the other hand, and I've talked about this a few times too, Minnesota was 11-0 in one-score games last year. And in general, I want to bet on regression to the mean in extreme situations like that. So based on Minnesota's success last year, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt early. I expect them to beat Tampa Bay on opening day. And, ultimately the Packers and the Bears, I think they have passed to being competitive, but they have more volatility on their roster. So I'll give Minnesota the edge for now, at least.
That makes sense to me. One thing I'll add about the regression of the mean is some people out there, I think, don't quite understand what we're thinking there. Because sometimes people go all right, so the Vikings were 11-0 in one-score games, but they were a good team last year. What do you think they were going to lose those games? Let's say they go 7-4. 7-4 is great. That's a very strong pace. That would have meant 4 fewer wins. That is how extreme the 11-0 is that they can still be an awesome team in one-score games, going 7-4, and then suddenly they don't win 13 games, they win 9. and we don't really talk about the Vikings last year. We hit on the NFC North. Let's hit on the AFC North. This is the only division that has 4 teams in the top 17. Talk to me.
Yeah, I mean, when I did record predictions, I actually have them all with at least 9 wins. I like actively try to never do that. But, here's the thing here. The Bengals, elite quarterback and elite offense with one of the best defensive coordinators of the game. They've played in each of the last 2 AFC championships. The Ravens, former MVP and Lamar Jackson, one of the most reliable teams in this century. Steelers, Mike Tomlin hasn't had a losing season in 15 freaking years. Pittsburgh is also one of the most reliable teams this century, and they improved this offseason. So I think their schedule is pretty manageable too. So I think 9 wins is very much on the table again. And then there's Cleveland. We talk about this all the time, Josh. The Browns are a title contender if the 2020 version of Deshaun Watson returns to action. But they have the most volatility of this group, so I have them behind the Steelers. But ultimately, these are 4 teams that can be playoff teams and even make a little noise if they get in.
Yeah, that's something that I'm actually going to be looking forward to each week is how the AFC North shakes out for both just general win-losses in the standings in the NFL, along with how your power ranking shifts, since that feels like a division that's going to be almost the most in flux potentially throughout the season. Now, you are at times a troubled New York Giants fan. They made the playoffs last year.
Yeah.
You gave them 0 credit. You have them all the way down at 18th. They are a below average team in your power rankings. Why are we not giving Daniel Jones and Big Blue, Brian Dable and company a little more credit for last season?
So this is a complicated answer, so I'm thrilled that you asked me about the Giants. First, I love the new regime. Head coaching Brian Dable. He won the Coach of the Year last year. Innovative, very aware of his own team's talent, crafts his offense and their defense to basically help their guys play better. He basically saved him and Mike Kafka basically saved Daniel Jones' career last season. So love the front office. I told you this before, Josh. Them trading a 7th round pick for Isaiah Simmons. Let's buy low on top 10 picks that have failed in a different spot. Genuinely made me happy today. I love that move because there's really no downside there.
Ryan, let's pause for a second. We're sickos. Who is Isaiah Simmons? What team was he on? What position does he play? For anyone that is a pure fantasy person and doesn't know defense.
Isaiah Simmons, I think he was the 6th overall pick, but he was a top 10 pick by the Cardinals a few years ago. They've stuck him in as an off-ball linebacker. He's probably more of a linebacker safety hybrid. Like what I'm hoping for with the Giants is they kind of put him in a situation where he's more or less positionless. So great athlete, was a high performer on that Clemson team that had, the Trevor Lawrence Clemson team. So again, I love taking shots at failed first rounders, especially when you can get them cheap. And, at minimum, the Giants add a linebacker with range, which is something they've been lacking for years. Now, let's continue with the Giants here from like a macros perspective. I think the offense is going to get better. Darren Waller is a big addition, as Josh loves them in fantasy. The wide receivers they've brought in, they're clearly stacking speed. They have a plan there. If Evan Neal takes a step forward, he was the 7th overall pick last year at right tackle. All of a sudden, the Giants go from a volatile, like 25th overall type offensive line into the middle of the pack, maybe even beyond that. So I think there's a path to that. I expect the coaching staff to get the most out of this team. But the thing here is this. They open the year with a brutal 8-game schedule where they'll be playing at a talent deficit in most of those contests. People talk about last year. Here's the thing. You said before, Josh, I've watched every snap of every NFL game since 2014. I don't do that for my health. I do that because I bet tens of thousands of dollars on football. And here's what I'll tell you about the Giants. The Giants won most of their games by the skin of their teeth last year in non-sustainable ways. Coaching creates margin. I could see the Giants being essentially the Titans of the NFC, where they continue to outplay their talent level because they're well ran. But ultimately, we have to be reality based and objective with our evaluation for these teams. And I think the Giants can be a playoff team, but I also think they have an uphill battle in a few areas.
I think Ryan read the show sheet. We talked about the Titans of the NFC. Let's talk about the Titans of the AFC who happen to play in Tennessee. Now, you have the Tennessee Titans at 21st. It felt like a team that was about to rebuild. I almost bet they're under in the betting markets earlier this offseason, and I held off because we've talked about this before. Mike Vrabel, their head coach, is consistently a talent maximizer. Year after year, they win more games than their roster kind of should on paper. And I held off since I thought, you know what if they are not quite rebuilding? And then they sign aging DeAndre Hopkins to a 2-year deal. And I think, that does actually feel like a win now move. You have them at 21st for, I'll frame it this way. For a Titans fan out there, like what is there even a path to this team cracking like the top 12 of your power rankings? Or is 21st kind of like hey, you might get up to 18, you might fall to 24, but you are the Titans. You are consistently mediocre for 2023.
Oh man, that's a brutal question because I think it's the latter of those two options. I have him where I have him for this reason. Mike Vrabel's been an excellent coach, like you said, a difference maker, talent maximizer. They, earlier in the offseason, there were rumors like, are they going to trade Ryan Tannehill? Or are they going to trade Derrick Henry? And now all of a sudden they're signing DeAndre Hopkins for, I think it was 2 years, right? So they're signaling that they're signaling that they plan to be competitive. The problem is one, the AFC is just loaded with premium teams where when they've been successful under Vrabel, there's been less of that going on than there is right now. And two is the Jaguars look like the new kings of the AFC South. So, I think Tennessee can be a factor, and they'll probably upset teams. And from my perspective, they're one of my least favorite against the spread teams to bet on because Vrabel just pulls the rabbits out of his hat. So, I do think though that we're looking at like 18 to 24 throughout the whole season, unless people start getting hurt.
Sorry, Titans fans.
Yeah.
Now, I know we're getting to the end of the power rankings. We're going to let more fan bases down. Talk to me about the Patriots at 26th out of 32 teams.
Yeah, I understood this. I understood some of the pushback on this, but here's the thing. I love Bill Belichick. When people speak badly of him in public, it's one of the few things in this whole world that like actually bothers me because it's pure insanity. This guy's an absolute mastermind, and the margin he creates on defense is unparalleled. But here's the thing, guys. They don't have a great roster, and their opening 4 games might be the toughest I've ever seen. So how can I be high? How can I be high on a team that might start 1-3? Through the first 4 games. They play the Eagles, they play the Dolphins, they play the Jets, and I don't remember who the other one is off the top of my head. But
I mean, right there, that's bad. A murderer's row.
Yeah, it's bad. It's bad.
All right, we're gonna upset one last fan base before we talk a little bit of ESPN strategy. The Indianapolis Colts have been in the news. Their owner, Jim Irsay, really does not like the running back position. He could have potentially extended or did something financially for Jonathan Taylor. He decided to spend $20 million to move Shamu. I am not kidding. I don't know where this whale was going, but there was an orca whale that he decided to spend $20 million to transport. We're both animal enthusiasts.
Sure.
I think he should have done that. But when you do that, like a day after talking about why Jonathan Taylor doesn't deserve a couple more million in the bank, it gets a little bit hard to see the calculus there. Anthony Richardson does not look like he's ready to command an NFL offense. You have him down at 31. Is there any hope, or is this just going to be a bottom feeder throughout 2023?
No, I think there's a few ways to look at this. One, I think Evan Silva was the one who framed it this when we had him on the show. Jim Irsay is a meddlesome owner. We have a rookie quarterback. We have a rookie head coach. Anthony Richardson's probably going to struggle early in his career because he was an inconsistent passer in college. Love his ceiling long-term. Love his fit with Shane Steichen, but I think early it could be a bumpy road. This roster has a lot of what ifs, and it's like, if Bernard Rayum solves the left tackle position, the Colts offensive line will be good again. Maybe their defense will be better. It's like a lot of like, maybe this will happen, maybe it won't. Now you have Jonathan Taylor, who's their best skill position player, seeking a trade in late August. Yeah. That's a distraction for a rookie quarterback, a tough situation for a rookie head coach who's trying to build a culture. I'll bet against that kind of situation in the short term with the expectation that Richardson and the Colts peak later in the year. I think next year maybe we're having a different conversation about the Colts this time.
All right, everyone, that's enough depressing thoughts on the bottom of the power rankings. Make sure you check out the full article the teams Ryan's high on, low on. There's write-ups for every single one, and it's a free-to-read article on the33team.com. Ryan took his sip of water. I'm going to pass it back to him so we can discuss some ESPN strategy.
Let's get back to fantasy, Josh. We'll have an article out on the 33rdteam.com later today where we tackle ESPN drafts. The article is going to be very similar to the Yahoo article in format. We'll provide targets, fades, round by round strategy, and a sample draft of a zero running back team. Thankfully, you can still get Amon-Ra St. Brown in the second round in most ESPN drafts. I don't know how this is happening. It should probably stop, but let's benefit from it for as long as we can. Now, Josh, what are some of the differences you notice between the two platforms?
So there's two big ones. One, it's a PPR full point per reception format. You should take your wide receivers a little earlier. You should lean into wide receiver heavy builds. So many receivers are going to be outscoring running backs in this format because, as we all know, receivers catch more passes than running backs. So if you're going to double the value of a catch, that is inherently going to boost pass catchers up more. And that also means you should probably be flexing a wide receiver. You could flex a running back in a PPR format. I have played in many, many, many PPR leagues over the years. Rarely do I see the winning team in a league routinely flexing a running back. I'd say 8 to 9 times out of 10, they've been flexing a wide receiver throughout the season. And then one other thing I noticed, quarterbacks go earlier. Our Chargers love affair kind of comes to an abrupt halt when Yahoo were taking Justin Herbert in the 6th and 7th round. And then you look and it's like, you know what? He goes exactly where he should in the 4th round of these drafts. I mean, Patrick Mahomes goes at pick 13. That's laughable. I would never draft him as a fringe round 1 pick. So those were kind of like the two big differences was PPR. So we flex a receiver. And at some point, you probably just have to pony up for a quarterback. Though someone like a Mahomes at 13, again, that is simply too expensive for our taste.
Before we continue, Trey, if you're still watching, you can jump on our Discord. We'll rate your team for you. Now, Josh, the good people love targets and fades. On ESPN, I'm going to target Gabe Davis at around pick 120. You're getting him 2 rounds later than you would in tournaments or most competitive leagues. I'm very interested in upside. And further, here's the thing with Gabe Davis. If Stephon Diggs goes down, Gabe Davis's ceiling skyrockets. He can be a league winner in that situation. I'm always looking to buy guys cheap whenever I can in those situations. Now, Josh, give us a target or fade on ESPN.
So I've talked pretty extensively on this platform. I've written articles about how Drake London just doesn't have top 12 upside in fantasy. I really do not believe he has top 12 wide receiver upside in this Falcons offense for this season. When Kyle Pitts was healthy last year, he was not startable in fantasy. He really broke out at the end of the year. I think Ritter takes a step forward, but ultimately, when I'm drafting a receiver in the 4th or 5th round of fantasy, if I don't think there's any chance of top 12 upside, I'm not drafting them. But for those that love the Falcons, that hate my Drake London take, guess what? I am drafting Drake London on ESPN because he does not go in the 4th or 5th round. He goes at pick 79 at the end of the 7th round. And I think that's why in betting, we call it line shopping. We can call this ADP shopping for fantasy football. And I have shopped the ADPs. I love your call of Gabe Davis at pick 120. And I think everyone out there should be very enthusiastic about if you want to draft wide receiver heavy, Drake London, pick 79.
This Jay Larky tweets on Twitter. To piggyback on your Drake London stance a little bit here, one of the interesting ways to look at this is one, Drake London broke the target share stat for me last year. I've never been scared of it before. It was a bit misleading with Drake London giving the pass volume in that offense. Now, 2, if Drake London was a Buffalo Bill, I think he's a 2nd round pick. But now that he's a Falcon, the volatility is definitely there where I can see why you're out on him at current cost, but why you'd want to buy him on ESPN at a value. Now, Josh, let's talk about some roster construction again. Zero running back and anchor running back can be scary terms for many new drafters. They can even be scary from some experienced ones. I know I didn't know what they were. I deployed them before actually knowing what the names were years ago. So can you break down what this kind of draft could look like on ESPN and how running back production will get manufactured in those types of builds?
Yeah, we have a sample draft for zero RB, and you'll see this in the ESPN article on the 33rdteam.com when it hits. And I'll walk people through these first few rounds and how stacked your roster gets, and then discuss how the running backs don't actually stink. Because I think the biggest thing that people who are newer to this type of strategy, their big fear is, why would I take a zero at running back? So
Yeah.
that's the premise, right? Is I don't like zero running back, or I don't like an anchor running back, because if my RB1 and RB2 slots give me 0 points, or if my RB2 slot specifically gives me 0 points, we don't want to take zeros. You don't want to take zeros. So let's discuss. Here's how you can theoretically build through 6 rounds on ESPN. Tyreek Hill, then Amon-Ra St. Brown, then Chris Olave. You have 3 most likely top 10 type wide receivers in fantasy. Round 4, you take TJ Hawkinson. You got a locked in top 5 tight end. He might even finish as the clear tight end 2 in fantasy like last season. Round 5, we take Trevor Lawrence. You gotta eat it at some point. You have to draft a quarterback. They go very early. Might as well wait to round 5. Once I've got 3 elite receivers and a tight end, you could take someone like Lawrence. Round 6, I don't know what's going on with Big Mike on Yahoo and ESPN. The drafters don't want Mike Williams. We want Mike Williams in the 6th and 7th round. You take Mike Williams. Why do we need more receivers? We already have Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Chris Olave, Mike Williams. Quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, top 5 upside. Tight end is TJ Hawkinson, that last year's tight end too. Then what we outline is 6 straight running backs. Round 7, David Montgomery. Probably a fantasy RB2. Every year he gets around 250 touches. He shares a backfield with new Lions rookie running back Jahmyr Gibbs, who's 199 pounds. I'm expecting 250 plus touches for David Montgomery. And because he's 25 pounds heavier than Gibbs, he probably gets the goal line work. We all remember Jamal Williams from last year. Round 8, let's home run swing DeAndre Swift on the Eagles. The past 3 years, he's been at least the RB 15 or better in PPR fantasy points per game. Change of scenery. We just need him to stay healthy. Round 9, we're gonna go stability with Brian Robinson. He had 17 carries a game last year as a rookie. He had over 30 receptions his final year in college at Alabama. If Antonio Gibson gets hurt, he actually has a bell cow all-purpose profile. And we do want more early round running back production. We can't just purely take too many backups at the end, because again, we went 0 running back. Who are we starting week 1? David Montgomery, DeAndre Swift, and Brian Robinson felt a little thin. Well, round 10, you can take Jamal Williams. Last year's Jamal Williams might again be this year's Jamal Williams with Jamal Williams. Until Alvin Kamara returns from suspension those first 3 weeks, you at least have Jamal Williams. Your round 10 pick is starting at least 3 weeks for you in fantasy. Round 11, we have another guy that can just start right away if we want, in Samaje Perine. I'd be shocked if Jamal Williams or Samaje Perine, if you're getting 0 good running back weeks early in the season from that duo, because again, Javonte Williams is not fully healthy. You can almost think of him as being suspended, because we're not going to be starting Javonte Williams in fantasy early in the season. And then now that we've locked in the trio of David Montgomery, Jamal Williams, and Samaje Perine early, we're going to hope one of DeAndre Swift or Brian Robinson pops. You can then take Zach Charbonnet in round 12, and again, hope either the groin injury of Kenneth Walker remains into the season and he goes down due to it, or maybe Charbonnet takes over some of the goal line work and the pass catching. So many paths for him to break out. And that is how you can start with such an elite core at quarterback, receiver, tight end on a PPR platform. And then you can fire off 6 straight running backs to ensure that early and late you have great options, in addition, of course, to your access to the waiver wire.
Josh will have an update to his cheat sheet coming out later today on the 33rdteam.com. Now, Josh, let's close out the show here. Who is your biggest late round mover in your new rankings?
Joe Mixon's getting a little bit up there in age. He's had some pretty bad legal issues. His rushing efficiency keeps declining. The Bengals actually suddenly have one of the best offensive lines in football. It might be a top 10 unit. It's a top 5 overall offense. We like Joe Mixon at this point because of the offense. We want access to the Bengals. I remember last year, Samaje Perine was actually better than Joe Mixon when he got opportunities for fantasy football. Perine had 3 games last year with at least 15 touches. He hit 19 PPR fantasy points a game in all 3 games. Samaje Perine, though, is now a Denver Bronco. Based on camp reports, preseason usage, the player that's stepping into the Samaje Perine role is going undrafted in nearly all formats. With your final pick in fantasy drafts, just take running back Chris Evans.